that is more powerful than any risk assessment written by the most competent risk assessor in the world. Philosophy becomes a very present part of the actual thinking process, because if you don't understand the concept, it's very hard to understand how it actually can come to reality. Stay curious, because that curiosity is making you ask the right questions, and what you're learning is going to serve you for the rest of your life. We're all completely different. We all have a fingerprint of our risk understanding that is unique to you and to your experience through life. Ultimately, in consultancy, that's what we do. We influence other people to adopt things that make them safer. I pitched the idea that a safety professional in the past was more of an auditor. I said, I think things are changing. And I think now what we need is safety entrepreneurs. We need people capable of creating following, creating influence. I'm still to see a root cause analysis for success. No one has actually gone, I'm going to spend a significant proportion of my time breaking down what was the key root cause for this success.
Every leader has a story to tell, and the Safe Leader podcast uncovers the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. Join me, your host, Mark McBride-Wright, as we hear from business leaders, academics, entrepreneurs, and agents of change as they share their journeys of innovation, resilience, and transformation. Together, we explore how they embrace the principles of safe leadership, sharing, acting, feeling, and empowering to create safer, more inclusive environments for everyone. Hello, welcome to the next episode of the Safe Leader podcast. I'm your host, Mark McBride-Wright, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Paulo Oliveira, who is Vice President of Process Safety Consulting at DEKRA UK. Paulo was born in Lisbon, Portugal in 1978 to an engineer father and a teacher mother, an inspiring combination that shaped his approach to both life and work. He completed his education in the UK and earned a Bachelor's of Engineering Honours in Electronic and Electrical Engineering and an MSc in Process Safety and Loss Prevention. Paulo's career spans sectors including commercial, retail, steel, chemical manufacturing and consulting across industries like utilities and defence. Starting as an assistant engineer, he progressed through roles in project engineering, maintenance, safety and leadership. Now, as Vice President of Process Safety Consulting at DEKRA UK, he leads impactful safety initiatives. A former basketball player with 20 years of experience, Paulo believes that safe environments are essential for progress, a principle that drives his work and life philosophy. Paulo, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I love that final bit in your bio. Safe environments are essential for progress, a principle that drives work and life philosophy. Your life philosophy. So tell us a bit more about that. What are you a very philosophical person?
Yes, is the short answer. I've since early days have always been interested in the conceptual nature of everything we do. I think it started in my teens, where I had a very inspiring philosophy teacher that challenged us not to learn what was being taught, but to learn why it was being taught. And I think I carried that throughout my teenage years into my adult life. And now, as I'm getting a little bit older, philosophy becomes a very present part of the actual thinking process. Because if you don't understand the concept, it's very hard to understand how it actually can come to reality.
Well, it certainly gears you up for being a really good safety engineer. Questioning the why on and why decisions are made and what we're making these decisions for, rather than just the decision or design itself. Have you found that safety engineering then was a sort of natural fit then for that philosophical side of yourself?
It grew into it. So when I started my engineering studies and engineering profession, as you do during your career, as you're learning, you have that feeling that you just want to do the things that will get you to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. However, as you start seeing things that you maybe think you might have an impact in, maybe I can make this a little bit better, or maybe I can see that person see this in a slightly different way, you start understanding the power of the why behind it. And certainly since becoming more focused on safety and safety practices, the power of understanding what drives someone to do something or what drives a certain concept is fundamental to being able to conduct adequate influence, because ultimately in consultancy that's what we do. We influence other people to adopt things that make them safer. So it grew into who I am professionally, and certainly now it's a big part of how I do my job.
So let's come back to the point there then, but let's go back and then come back to the present. Let's go back to the past and just want to understand a little bit then about the young Paulo in Portugal. What brought you to the UK? Did you always want to be an engineer? Well, actually, maybe, because you said one of your parents, had that training and did it. Sometimes though we don't want to do what our parents do. We actively push against it and then end up succumbing to it if we find actually it could be a good option for me actually. Was that yourself in your younger years, or did you always see it forward?
A little bit. So if I go way back, I was initially, my route was to enter medical school. So okay. I started with, as many other people do, as you get into your teens, you have 2 or 3 routes that you can see. And the medical route was quite appealing at the time, and it drove some of my thinking. However, as I went through the latter stages of secondary school, starting to think about university, I started showing some aptitude on a certain type of thinking, logical thinking, that seemed to align well with engineering tasks. And at the time, as much as I wanted to say, no, I'm going to be completely different. Dad, you're the engineer. Mom, you're the teacher. I'm going to be doing something different. At some point, it started feeling very much like, actually, there's something here for me. The interesting bit came straight after that. As I entered university, and I think it's really pertinent to today's conversation, because it wasn't so much a conscious drive of, I've always wanted to be an engineer. The first few years were very difficult mentally. And it forced me to almost having to come out of a mental paralysis of why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Because the drive to learn more, to want to know more, it's almost like someone pressed pause and everything else came to the forefront. Luckily, I had a very, very strong support network of friends, and in answer to one of the questions you mentioned, during that period, I started talking to this young, lovely lady from the UK, who is now my wife. So we started talking on the days of pen pals when they first moved on to the online domain, and we were exchanging messages, just getting to know. What I was curious about life in the UK, she was curious about life in Portugal, and we started talking, and that started growing. And as that became a little bit more than just a contact on a communication site, there was a little bit of a light on that purpose and drive and focus.
Okay.
And everything else seemed to go to the right level of focus in life. So very much grateful for Angie's appearance in my life to help me deal with a difficult time, and to the friends that were around me at the time that supported me through that as well. That kind of started a whole momentum where I rediscovered that curiosity about what I wanted to do and what that meant and the potential in front of me. And it brought me to the UK to complete my studies whilst working full time, which again in itself was a challenge, but it felt like a constructive challenge rather than a place where you don't really understand the way forward.
That can pretty much typify the undergraduate or the first degree years, can't it? I remember being told when I started at university, you're probably used to always being top of your class. And then when you come to university, it's a refinement of a refinement, you know. You're with all the people
Indeed.
who were top of their class as well, you know, to get into here. And so, you know, that can start to play on your, well, I mean, for me, it certainly did, you know, like your sense of belonging, like were you good enough? Like even though you'd earned your place and got in, you know, I feeling like you can be drowning a little bit in the technical content because it's just so different to what you did. The step change from being at school to then studying engineering, the maths, the chemistry, you know, whatever your branch of engineering might be that you then study, those fundamental modules, thermodynamics, you know, it's you know, it's like witchcraft, you know, or it feels like you're
Absolutely.
like learning a new language, you know, and it can be quite hard to get your head around.
And your social interaction also drastically changes. You go from somewhere where the social boundaries are very well established, the routines are established, into a place where everything's open. You need to rewrite, you need to reset and rethink how you fit in something that has not been, in a way, designed for you. It's been designed for something much, much bigger. We certainly, and I use we, because the contingent of that year for when I entered university life was very much looking around going, where's the safety rails? Where do we go to know how to walk in the right direction? But like you say, it's such a overwhelming step for a lot of people getting into the engineering world that we see it now, and I'm sure we'll see it in the future, the need for that more aware, more intentional support to keep them in that positive space of it's going to be okay, just keep going.
You know, I mean, let's move on to that bit now. You know, I think you're alluding to something that just, in my view, permeates everything that we need to do within safety. You know, it's that being tuned into the psychological safety of the future engineers in the flow of them coming into then this new learning environment, and then as they come out into a new working environment, into industry, you know, and I think it's been getting better, putting in support and adjustments and needs and what have you, but I think there's still a lot more we could do. And this is where really safety intersects with diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's about knowing what you need in order to thrive, but then also understanding that about your peers around you, and then figuring out how can you then align yourself and be curious about their lived experience, so it then becomes your learned experience. And I think as engineers, we don't often bring up anything that's going on in our minds. You know, we're not a profession that's really trained to show emotion or to, you know, we're very logical, we're very fact-based, we're very right or wrong, and the grey area is a little bit ambiguous. And maybe that's where, like, within safety, we've got something to teach, like the rest of engineering professions, because we are sometimes in the grey area, in the justification of why things are being done, How do you see then in the work that you're doing? So you studied your engineering and then you moved into safety. How do you see the differentiation within your work between like traditional technical safety, process safety, but then the movement into sort of psychological safety and more team dynamics and human factors and ergonomics? But I guess human factors and ergonomics is more the physicality of how you're learning, but actually it's been a while since I've been an actively practicing safety engineer on technical projects. We still didn't really talk much about the culture of how we talk about it in inclusion and diversity and belonging. And I wonder if there's a bridge we can still make between the two.
Absolutely. And just kind of a segue from what you said. So as I transitioned into safety, I came from that very logical, structured, technical world where answers are there if you just know the right formula and combination and you get to it and you're like, yeah, there you go, move on to the next thing. And as you actually start understanding the behind the scenes influence of people that do the decision making, people that are affected by the systems you're creating, people that are so far down the actual supply chain of events that you only see the impact months, years later on, and the people around you, family, friends. And there is a clear need for understanding how the logical side of what we do in the safety engineering side connects with the emotional coefficient of everything we do. It's actually an ongoing discussion we're having at the moment. So a really good example is anyone that's read a technical standard will know the experience of having to go through those lines of very dry information and coming at the end thinking, I actually don't know what this means. Whilst when you talk to someone that has gone through that process and they can clearly communicate, well, the expectations are standard at this, based on their experience, the bridge between a little bit of technical information that's core to what you need to do versus sharing your experience of applying it, learning and seeing the successes completely connects the two sides. And that can't happen in places where the logic is kind of the primacy held over everything else, where people see, the mathematics, the numbers give you every answer. Because in a place with a culture that focuses only on bottom line results, on the technical answer, they're missing the point that you can't get to that without the experience, the sharing, the actual ability to relate and not relate to certain things, to be curious why things are different. I had a really interesting experience during my consulting phase of my career, where I had to operate a number of workshops with a company that's not in the UK. So culturally, they're very different. But within that place, there was multiple other cultures working together. And you could see at first how difficult it was, the friction and certain things that didn't seem to connect, some difficulty in understanding where people were coming from or why they were putting certain things forward. But when you're curious enough to understand and you can start switching on those kind of points of leverage, there was moments in those discussions where you can see the level has been tenfold higher because you're listening to people that look at things differently.
Yes.
And without that, engineering just becomes an application of formulas and repeat and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat. So there is a clear need for that cultural aspect to consider as a fundamental part of being successful in keeping people safe in every aspect.
Yeah.
The difference, the way we integrate that difference, and the way we give that difference the power it can have to drive us towards the right direction. And I've actually seen that happen. I've seen that happen in that occasion. I've seen that happen with people that have come into a team thinking they don't have much to offer, but just given the right pathway, they flourish and they become one of the experts that then people rely on. And it is fundamental.
And this is exactly square in the area where, representation, the ability to speak up if you feel you need to speak up or want to speak up, and reciprocally being aware when you're taking up too much space and you need to let others or invite others in to share their perspective. This is all about inclusion and equity and having diversity around the design table and in the design team, from the different projects, the different communities, the different types of engineers. And I'm curious if this is where our work needs to sit in the coming years, with the kind of pendulum swing back on diversity, equity and inclusion measures with the new administration in the United States. Engineering businesses, in my view, shouldn't see that as now a license to stop doing what we're doing, because actually we should just continue to do what we have been trying to do, or I hope we're trying to do, which is diversify the profession with bringing new people in, because we have a shortage on talent. But then once we've got people in, actually having the safety within teams that we can do the best type of engineering, we can engineer the best designs, and everyone can share their perspectives and not be shut down for fear of these power dynamics, or the fear of asking the wrong question or saying the wrong thing or appearing stupid, or being the only person of a particular background or gender or sex or sexual orientation or whatever in a group, and then feeling like the only one, and therefore not having agency, not having equity and voice. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think there's an element of each of us as well, knowing where we're maybe having an impact on others, and then where we need to do that self-reflection to change our behaviors.
I totally agree, and I had a discussion pre kind of events of this weekend, and I think it will follow that tied into that. I think we had a really fruitful period of initiatives for diversity, equity, and integration. But an initiative, by its nature, is a starting point. It's that initial impetus to change perspectives. I actually think that the signals we're seeing from certain governments don't necessarily mean now there's a big barrier. I think it means if this is the right thing to do, we take the word initiative out of the way and we do what's right. We kind of carry the flag, but at the same time, see that as the new normal. This is how we think. This is what's bringing that value. And I picked up on an article a few weeks back where someone was talking about what's true value in an organization. And it kept coming back to the same thing, is recognizing the things that make that organization stand out, those things that make that organization contribute the way it does. And if we segment ourselves to a certain type of people with a certain set of characteristics in a certain context, what we're creating is an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And people will think the same, they'll do the same thing time and time again. And then, as Albert Einstein said, you can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them. So where we are now, the challenges we have are very different to what they were in 1950s, 1980s. We have a climate change challenge that's tremendous. We have social challenges that will be born from that, and that will potentially affect the way we look at engineering as a whole. So to me, people in leadership positions across sectors, across disciplines, they should see this as okay, we've done the initiative. We all know this is the right thing to do. Let's now just do it. Let's now embed that thinking instead of making it a signal.
Yeah,
I'm going to commit to this. No, I've already committed to that. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. It's about implementing. It's about influence and process, influence and procedure, looking at how we already do things through this lens of inclusion and thinking, are we keeping people safe? I just think it all comes back to safety. Honestly, it really does. In building out the Safe Leader training course that's linked to my book, The Safe Leader, there's so many engineering idioms, engineering graphics that we've repurposed and retooled to talk about culture, and it's there. It's just there. It's already, we already have the mindset. I just hope that there are enough engineers in leadership roles, and leadership doesn't mean you manage people. Leadership, you could be a new graduate and you have leadership because you create fellowship around you. I hope there's enough people entering the profession now at all levels and that are in their profession that really see this as the way forward and the way to do it, because engineering is one of the most, I think in a survey in the UK, I think after dentistry or something, it was the most trusted profession, or maybe that was a pay. I think that was a different, I'm mixing up surveys. There was a survey that was done, it was of the most professions where you're trusted the most, engineering came right up there, in the top 3 as a profession where people are trusted. So if society trusts us, then we should be role modeling these behaviors in how we do our work, and how we show up.
Absolutely. One of the points I often make, and I've experienced that in different environments, from very, very heavy industry to technology leading companies. When you talk to engineering teams, there's a sense of meritocracy. So you earn your badges by doing the job right, by working in the constraints of what you have and creating that value. And when you kind of peel the layers of that, you see that there is a clear view that if you're talented, or if you develop the talent, I'm a firm believer that talent alone gets you nowhere. Mm-hmm. Hard work to maintain that level of competency is really important. But when you peel the layers, you can see the need to maintain that open and safe space for people to thrive and develop. Yeah. And when I had a discussion earlier in the year about the safety profession, the safety professional, what's in the future, what were my views, and I pitched the idea that a safety professional in the past was more of an auditor. They came in, they checked what you were doing, provided recommendations, identified non-conformances, and continued that cycle, the continuous improvement cycle that is part of safety systems. I said, I think things are changing. Mm-hmm. And I think now what we need is safety entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Whether you're staff in a company or you're self-employed, we need people capable of creating following, creating influence well past the boundaries of what they do. For example, a person that within a organization can create a brand, a self-brand of this person understands safety, this person helps us be safer, and it actually makes our lives a little bit easier and better. That person is creating a tide of change that, regardless of what policies and procedures are in place, people will gravitate to the right things. So to me, that's where the future lies for us, is the safety entrepreneur, the idea that we don't just check what the people are doing and tell them to do it right. We actually understand the people. We understand the difficulties, the challenges, the opportunities. We put that blanket of psychological safety around them to get the best out. And then we put ourselves as the mechanism for which they can rely on to create that change, without ever needing to go and saying, you're doing this wrong.
Yeah.
It just creates that tide. I've seen a couple of really good examples with young people that come from a much more media savvy kind of experience, where they've stitched two things together that a few years back people wouldn't pick it up. So they saw someone doing an unsafe practice and they thought, you know what, I'm not going to intervene like we used to, kind of stop what you're doing, tell me what you're doing, this is how you should do it, and you should think about this as well. What they did was they created an interaction with the permission of the person doing it, where they were talking about what they were doing, and then they told him, look, I'd like to post this. The person saw what they were doing and said, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that. The conversation just spiraled.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Just spiraled completely. And I thought, that is more powerful than any risk assessment written by the most competent risk assessor in the world. That person, that moment where they went, oh, I didn't realize I was putting my foot there, or I was actually, my hand was in the line. And that was through that almost innocuous intervention of, can I share what you're doing?
Yeah.
And it comes back to that. Let me share your experience. Share it with me. I'll share what I know with you.
Yeah.
And let's see what we can learn from it.
I love that idea of the safety entrepreneur, and safety being a kind of glue, a binding force that brings everyone together. One thing I noticed when I started working at UCL doing some teaching was actually a bias that I had as a chemical engineer in terms of my understanding of safety, in that I assumed that everyone saw safety through the same way as me, as being a safety engineer. But actually, safety means something different to different branches of engineering, especially when you're a student and you haven't necessarily worked with engineers from other subjects, from other disciplines. Now, when I worked in industry, I worked in the concept design phase. So projects were high throughput. They were quite short. 6 weeks maximum for a project, maybe a bit longer. And you worked with all the disciplines. Piping, instrumentation, environment, safety, process, civil, structural, etc., reliability. So you got to sort of understand this interdisciplinary need when working on a design project, and how safety was understood by the other disciplines, or they also got good contact time with a safety engineer or the safety team. But when you're teaching safety to students, here I was as a chemical engineer teaching safety at UCL. It's an integrated engineering program as well in the earlier years. So, the chemical engineering students kind of vaguely knew what I was referring to, but safety meant something completely different to the systems engineers and to the electronics engineers and the electrical engineers and what have you. So I wonder, it made me really pause and think, oh, here's me thinking that safety can be this common binding force between engineers, but actually maybe the foundation isn't as harmonized as what I thought it was.
That is so visible nowadays, and we've had a few examples of that in recent years. I remember being at one of the Hazards conference, and Dame Judith Hackett was presenting on Grenfell.
Yeah.
And she made a point that I thought was really interesting. She said, people in the chemical industry and oil and gas understand system safety of systems really well. They understand the multivariable aspect of safety. But when you look at construction, the understanding is much narrower. It's about the activity conducting at that point and the thing they're actually holding.
Yeah.
And she asked the question, why is it so hard to connect the knowledge we have in one sector to another to prevent something like this happening?
Yeah.
And it goes straight to the point you're making. We don't start with the same level of perception of risk when we grow up. We all have different experiences to shape the things that we're kind of, I'm not doing that, versus the things, I'll give it a go. And just there, we're all completely different. We all have a fingerprint of our risk understanding that is unique to you and to your experience through life. When you get in front of people that are being shaped in terms of the thinking that they have to have, so systems engineers, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, they'll use that fingerprint to color code what they're learning. And for example, in systems engineering, safety has to do with a level of validation constraints on what's actually being developed, whilst in chemical engineering, it's an output of the stuff that we're actually trying to create. And the mechanical guys will have a different kind of perception of what that safety aspect.
Pressure vessels,
exactly.
Explosion, exactly.
And when I've actually experienced in one of the companies I worked in as a member of the staff, where we had a conversation once, and that we had the asset integrity team. I was part of the process safety team, and we had an advisor consultant that came in to have a look at broad asset management in the company. And we sat down and talked about risk matrices. What's the risk acceptance criteria? And from a process safety point of view, there was one. From an asset integrity, there was another. From a business continuity, there was another. And the consultant just sat there smiling. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm not really getting the value of this. There's three, you should tell us which one's right. And now, as a consultant, I know exactly where that smile comes from. It's him seeing the penny drop moment of, this is why it's hard. All of you are talking different perceptions of risk and trying to manage it in one way. And I think it's that is a challenge, especially now with newer technology, with threats like cybersecurity threats, with artificial intelligence coming in and blurring every single boundary we have. To be able to articulate risk in a way that's relatable and manageable is going to be one of the key aspects of these safety entrepreneurs. Because if we continue just reverting back to, no, that's how it was, the conversation's moved on. The conversation's moved on from that dimension.
I wonder, there's a few things going through my mind. One of the things I'm in the middle of exploring, which we could talk about later as well, offline, is the need to try and create a the working title is like Process Safety Educator Network. I went to Imperial. I'm a visiting professor at UCL. I've recently relocated to Brooklyn. I've got the Tandon School of Engineering on my doorstep. Like, I've met with the process safety lead there. All these different places do teach safety to chemical engineers in a different way. And then we've also got the conversation we've just had about different types of engineering learning about safety, and then the impact that these engineers are going to have when they move into industry. So I've just been toying with the idea of, could I create a network of connected professionals that are academics, they work in teaching safety, and then I have a sort of conduit through which I can flow these ideas that are in the Safe Leader framework of, because I've tested it a bit at UCL in my visiting professorship. There's sort of two ways to influence engineers on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's the process of doing your engineering, so the experience in a team, how included you feel, the ability to say what you really think, and then it's the consideration of the engineering that you're doing. So the end communities, the thing that you're designing, the process that you're creating, the product that you're making. Are you thinking about the end stakeholder, the end communities that are going to be affected by it, or they're going to have to use it as early on in the design process as possible, not too late in the design process when all your degrees of freedom are fixed. You've got less flexibility to move, and all of a sudden you realize that the thing you've designed doesn't actually work for the community or the user, So it really gets the students thinking about inclusion. And because I used to work in concept design, one of the things that was really big there was inherent safety design assessments, because as what you don't have can't kill you type thing, Trevor Klett's style quotes. So I've been wondering, is there a scope for like an inherently inclusive design assessment, where when we're doing our designs, we're looking at through the lens of inclusion, accessibility, user experience. So I developed some tools that we used with the students in their second year, which worked quite well. It basically took the stakeholder mapping exercise that they had to do, but made it a bit deeper, a bit chunkier, a bit meatier. And had, it was a bit like doing an equality impact assessment that they often do in the built environment, yes, but they often get done too late. So there's design tools that are already used in industry that I see a benefit of bringing into the flow of education. But I think, I don't know, it's a work in progress, but I love your idea of this safety entrepreneur and safety professionals being a kind of glue that I think there's work to do in helping before we go out and try and help others. We almost like need to help the safety entrepreneurs understand one another's perception of safety, because obviously that's what's not been done in the example you gave when there was different perceptions of risk. So yeah,
it's a at the same time such a threat and such an opportunity. We all know that the safety community is a very driven, very focused, very open community. The factors, the things that drive them are people. They want people to be safe. They want people to have their jobs for a long, long time and take the value and benefit from having those jobs without having to suffer severe consequences to their health. It's how you measure the impact of what you're doing. In the past, it was about kind of injury rates, etc. But right now, we've been exposed to something that's a little bit more immediate, which is this influencing idea, the followers, the whole idea that people listen to a message you have to give. Now, if we can imagine, quoting John Lennon, a world where there's a understanding that we operate within a business that's generate money, that within it there's functions that sustain that business continuity, and right at the center there's an element of care for people that is in a structured way delivering that care, that looks at, as you said, from the inward, how are we actually integrating people and providing that level of empowerment and maintaining a healthy level of diversity in our thinking, in our viewpoints, but also how are we actually influencing the other businesses that look at us and say, those guys are doing something right, what is it? And how visible it is that this is a big part of it. I think the safety entrepreneur is the visibility of the intangible, the visibility of how we get the best of our people. And it's a big challenge, a big threat, because once you start realizing the level of impact you can have by doing that, you can also start realizing the negative impact you can have if you are attacking things in a certain way that maybe is not as considerate, as broadly as it can and should be.
Yeah, very true. But then the risk of not doing the work means that you have, you're not increasing the probability of surfacing up your unknown unknowns, which is one of the core bits of safety practice, isn't it? It's been a while since I've been doing any active practice of safety management tools, doing a quantitative risk assessment or a qualitative risk assessment, or generating bow tie diagrams to include in a coma report or an offshore safety case or to get licenses to operate or whatever. I do wonder if as we shift or as we diversify how we do what we do, how should these tools evolve? Is there additional chapters we could be adding into some of these tools to try and surface up some of these findings? You make the point about logic being the primacy and numbers being the dominant thing that engineers want. Well, obviously that's quantitative risk assessment, because it's quantitative. But then, do we then have more opportunity in the qualitative risk assessment types of things by doing more listening exercises with the workforce, and then tying that up to all the package stuff that nowadays we think of as DEI, about workforce engagement, productivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then house it all within that. And then we've got DEI almost sitting within an element of it, sitting within our approach to safety management and well-being of our workforce. But the key, though, is what indicators do we pull out? Because people still want leading and lagging indicators. And I've yet to kind of really articulate what we ought to add on to an HSE matrix, of what's being tracked. Are there some additional lines that we could add on from a data perspective that give a leadership team a good handle on how the business, the team, the organization, the asset are performing on this less intangible, more intangible sort of stuff? Have you got any experience on that?
It's that perennial question, isn't it? How do we quantify the unquantifiable? And when we look at safety incidents across decades, even centuries, if we could go back that far back, there's very little that's to do with failure rates. Very little to have to do with the stuff we spend a lot of time quantifying. So the whole integrity of that pipe failed because we thought it was 10 to the minus 7 and it actually was 6 to the 10 to the minus 3. Very rarely it's to do with that. Most of the times, systematic. It's something we've done at some point that drove us in a certain pathway. Now, those are easily measured because you have your best practices. You have your approved pathways for design and testing and validation, verification. We have organizations that literally, like the one I work in, made their lives as confirming that what you're saying is going to happen will happen. When we come to the actual human component of that, it becomes increasingly tricky to say, oh, actually, we had a diverse discussion here. Mm-hmm. There was a much higher quality of kind of exposure to thinking that led us to a much narrower pathway in terms of introducing a systemic error. So indicators are great because, unfortunately, or fortunately, industry 100% bought into something that's apparently often misquoted from Charles Deming, which is what's measured gets managed. What he was intending to say is, be careful, because if you measure something, you will manage it to the nth degree and maybe forget about the other stuff that make it happen. Yeah, but we do need something to tell us, actually, it is working. So I in the past thought of the definition of diversity, equity, and integration sometimes gets coated in other discussions, and to take them out, it has to be done in a way that clearly understands what diversity means in that context, what's equity in that context, what's integrating in that context. And you picked up on a few examples. Diversity is, it could be as simple as we have the right disciplines around the table talking about this thing that affects that group and the peers and the stakeholders they are involved with. Or it could be we have these people that bring completely different type of thinking because culturally they're exposed to different pressures.
Yes.
Or it could be that these people, they all do the same job, but they actually experience different circumstances. Those are all things we should be thinking and starting to look carefully, both as safety managers, as the entrepreneur, or safety practitioners, to start picking up on, wait a minute, I'm in an assessment for a fairly complex system, but it's only me, the systems engineer, and the control systems guy. Where's the chemical engineer? Where's the mechanical engineer? Where's the operations representative that operates on the night shift during startup? The other side to this DEI thinking is the equity aspect is really not challenging, but it's a hard effort. And what I mean with this is we work in organizations that are structured, levels of competence, levels of seniority, etc. And to flatten the argument, to get a juniorish person that has some fantastic ideas and some really good energy and a completely different perspective to feel comfortable in front of a 20-year tenured engineer in that same field to say, I don't agree with that. That's all about psychological safety. Mm-hmm. That's all about being clear that once we're in that environment, you're bringing something that a 20-year, 10-year person can't bring, which is a fresh pair of eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then that little bit of, in a bit, forcing the coin to say, I want this junior person in these meetings. I want this junior person experiencing commissioning. It integrates that thinking and challenges that echo chamber that tends to happen once we get a bit complacent with our own competency. So I think the key indicator one is in your organization, how often do you have processes that bring cross-departmental collaboration? I think that's a strong indicator of your thinking in that way. And your lagging indicator is how many of the things that have gone right/wrong can you trace back to a team that was a little bit of an echo chamber.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening in root cause analysis. They tend to go to the technical answer.
Yeah.
They tend to go to, some organizations tend to stop way too short, and there's a human error, so let's point there. But what I don't often see is they're going, wait a minute, this assessment, this decision making didn't work. Why didn't it? And was it actually through a lens that allowed a wide point of view? Did we calibrate this against fresh pair of eyes, or was it the same people deciding the same thing? So maybe there's something in those two fields, how you're structured and how often you engage them, and when you do things right and when you don't do things right, how often do we ask that question? Did we have diverse viewpoints? Did we actually integrate those viewpoints? Did we give people the opportunity, creating that equity kind of baseline, to contribute to this decision to allow us to move towards safety?
Were we inclusive in how we designed the mode of engagement such that those that may not feel comfortable offering their view in a certain environment could through an additional means? Were the people running such sessions like well versed in inclusive leadership and therefore getting the best out of the teams around them? One thing that also dawned on me as you were talking there was we also focus on, quite rightly, when things go wrong and identifying root causes and this and that. In the HR world, the equivalent of that from a culture perspective are exit interviews. Now, obviously, that's quite late in the process when someone's decided to leave and they're walking out the door. Some organizations don't even conduct exit interviews, so they miss an entire data source. Those that do it, how effective they do it then dictates the value that they get out of the data that's yielded. One organization that I was in a diversity call with recently brought up this idea that they do staying interviews. So people who've chosen to stay in the organization, so annually when they engage with them, and then they find out such great information about what makes the employees sticky and keep them there. And they can identify any undertones of people who are just staying there because they have to versus being really passionate and engaged and loving the work. So then you can take earlier action to try and better align, career ambitions or whatever it is that may be making people be just a bit passive, So I wonder if there's something in that with when we do assessments and analysis, like where things have gone right, where things have gone well, sort of celebrating that and sharing those views.
I'm still to see a root cause analysis for success. We all kind of do it because we all want to jump on the winning bandwagon, but no one has actually gone, I'm going to spend a significant proportion of my time breaking down what was the key root cause for this success. And I think if we did that, we would start painting a very clear picture that there is a really clear role of DEI in successful projects and successful engineering. But like you say, we tend to have that continuous improvement mentality that focuses on fixing the wrong rather than embedding the right. You mentioned what makes employees stay. Talent retention is a challenge in engineering. It's hard to get engineers. It's hard to keep them.
Yeah.
It's hard to do successful projects, impactful projects, and it's really hard to replicate them time and time again. So the principles are exactly the same.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Oh, definitely lots of follow-up conversations to have. Right. Okay. Some quick-fire questions. So, what's your favourite engineering standard or guideline to work with?
Oh, Christ. So, the best constructed standard I've worked with, though it's very comprehensive, is 61508.
Yeah.
It took 20 years to get off the ground, and you can see why. But I do have to make a mention on the AMS group work on the ISO 55,000 standards for asset management. It was a topic that everyone talked about, and everyone said it's impossible to put into a guidance document that people can use, and that group did a fantastic job at creating that.
Oh, fantastic. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Oh, I try to be an early bird and end up being a night owl. So I consciously try to wake up early and have a number of routines and rituals to start my day. Not necessarily kind of working, but things like it can range. It could be exercise. I could go for a run, or I could do some stretching. I could do some breathing. I like to have time with Angie first thing in the morning. Breakfast kind of sets the day going. The problem is then to not become a night owl at the same time, which sometimes happens, but not more naturally inclined to be a night owl, working hard to be an early bird.
Got you. What's the best professional advice you've ever received?
Stay curious. I had a really interesting short conversation with a senior manager for a top 500 organization when they were doing a very, very well-known strategic project associated with net zero in decarbonization. And the discussion was very positive, very energetic, because it that whole energy of we're changing the world, making things better. And as a little bit of a sidebar, we were talking about resources, talking about things, who should be doing what, and he halfway through the conversation say, stay curious, because that curiosity is making you ask the right questions, and what you're learning is going to serve you for the rest of your life. So that would be my advice to everyone. Stay curious. Don't believe the stuff you believe you know.
What's a safety-related tool or method you couldn't live without?
Oh, asking questions. I think it comes back as simple as that. Not necessarily an assessment, but just the stopping yourself from having the answer, asking that question first of what is it that I need to know, what is it that I need to do. Without that, it becomes that exercise of, are you complying with what we think is right? So that conversation, that thinking, asking questions is the most powerful thing we could have.
Okay. Favorite engineering or safety conference you've attended?
Oh, that's a good one. I have a soft spot for hazards because of the diversity of topics, and they always do a fantastic job organizing it. The European Process Safety Centre conference is pretty powerful as well. And I was lucky enough to be invited to speak at it was a kind of smaller group for the Middle Eastern chapter of the Association of Safety Engineers, American Safety Engineers Association, should I say. And they, again, they're very positive, very constructive. So there's a lot, but I have a soft spot for hazards.
Who has been the most influential mentor in your career?
There's a few. I think there's from a professional point of view, I've been very, very lucky to work with people that they saw my passion for the topic as a gift rather than a nuisance. People like my previous boss when I was still in manufacturing. His name's Mike Wood. He's a safety professional. He still does exactly that. Very pragmatic, feet on the ground. My current boss is an old-fashioned passion safety engineer. He genuinely believes in what we're doing and the impact we're having on people. And when we have our commercial conversations, it always goes back to that, which is great to hear. But real influence is, to be honest, is the people I've been working through all these years, and they've all inspired me in one way or another.
Brilliant. If you were not an engineer, what would you be doing?
20 years ago, I'd have said I'll be playing basketball in the NBA, although I'm only 6 foot, so that might have been a challenge. If I wasn't an engineer, I think the medical profession has always appealed to me. I think it's stuff to do with people and looking after people, if I'm going to be honest. So if I wasn't an engineer, either that side, the medical side, sports maybe, again, people, performance, all those things kind of come together, but certainly people-centric.
People-centric. And finally then, what's a fun fact most people don't know about you?
Well, there's a few weird ones. The one I found out, I think it was about 3 years ago, post-COVID, we did one of those DNA tracking things.
Oh yeah.
And I used to talk, when I talked to Angie, I used to say, look, let's do it. Let's find out what our roots are. And I found out that my heritage is very strongly linked to Celtic population. So I have strong, because Portugal is Celt-Iberian originally, but there's very defined strong links to Ireland, Scotland, and Wales.
Oh, right.
And then a element of Nordic, 1.5% Finnish. That one I haven't got my head around yet, but somewhere
in the past.
Somewhere.
it's in there. I've done that as well, that 23andMe, and I was 82% British, but yeah, large percentage, 10 or 12% from Eastern Europe, Poland.
Oh wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, now my great grandfather was Polish, so that's
Okay.
which is funny because my mum and my uncle never ever knew that they found out later on in life that my gran was the product of a fling, shall we say, that my great grandmother had with a Polish soldier. So they found out through my gran's birth certificate this Polish surname on it that they were like, "What is this?" and so I sort of knew this, obviously, stories that we've been told growing up, but then when I did 23andMe and then seeing that result come through, I'm like, "Oh my God, that's that side of the family coming out." Otherwise, if I didn't have that context, I would have been like, "What is this?"
Yeah, absolutely. It surprised me as well. That's the distribution. I knew about obviously there's African and Celtiberian, but I didn't expect the Celtiberian to be so strong.
So strong.
And I certainly didn't expect 1.5% finish.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation today. If people want to get in touch with you on stuff that we've covered, or just reach out, find out more, how can they do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open to talking to anyone, so just find me, just drop me a message, and happy to talk.
We'll put a link to your profile in the show notes then. Wonderful. Thank you, Paulo.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You have been listening to the Safe Leader podcast, uncovering the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. If you have enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to the Safe Leader podcast on your podcast platform of choice and get notified when a new episode goes live. Did you know that we also offer a full transcript on each of our podcast episodes? Check out my website, markmcbridewright.com. Here, you can also explore the training, coaching, and keynote speaking services I offer. And whilst you're there, why not join the Safe Leader community by subscribing to the Safe Leader Insights mailing list? Thank you for listening, and please come back and join us on a future episode.